Last time we have seen topic number 2, transistor amplifier. In transistor amplifier, we have seen the transistor biasing. What is transistor biasing? Proper voltage of a proper polarity is given to the terminal of a transistor is called as a transistor biasing. We have seen the voltage water bias method. It is the most important bias method. Therefore, we can remember the voltage water bias method. We can draw the circuit diagram of this voltage water bias method. It is most important. And we can explain about the circuit diagram. And we can analyze collector current and collector emitter voltage in a voltage water bias. Also, we have seen the by using voltage water bias method, we can draw the circuit diagram of a CE amplifier. Generally, single stage CE amplifier, all amplifier circuits, C amplifier circuit or any amplifier circuit, it is drawn with the help of a voltage water bias method. In our syllabus, in BSc part first, we have seen the single stage CE amplifier. Now here we have to study the two-stage RC coupled amplifier. That means cascaded amplifier, coupled amplifier, multi-stage amplifier. Because a single stage amplifier is insufficient to drive the output signal. Insufficient to drive the output signal. It does not hear the sound with speaker by a speaker. Therefore, it is insufficient when we connected a single stage amplifier. For this purpose, two stage of the amplifier that can be connected, two stage of the amplifier that can be coupled. It is called as a coupled amplifier. It is called as a cascaded amplifier. There are three types: direct coupled amplifier, transformer coupled amplifier, RC coupled amplifier. We have to see the RC coupled amplifier. Last time we have seen sound व्यवस्थित. Last time we have seen RC circuit diagram. Circuit diagram, it is most important.
Calling चालू आहे सर सगळ्यांना.
Therefore, sound mute करून ठेवा. नाहीतर मला इथून म्यूट करता येत. पुन्हा साऊंड चालू आहे. मठपती काल बी तुम्ही साऊंड लय वेळा डिस्टर्ब केला आणि घरात बोलताय. म्यूट करतच नाही. म्यूट करा येत नाही का? नवीन मोबाईल आहे का तुम्ही नवीन आहे मोबाईलच्या बाबतीत? चालूच आहे बघा मठपती. रेकॉर्डिंग होते आहे का नाही? रेकॉर्डिंग मध्ये हा मठपती ह्याच्यातनं बाहेर गेले बहुतेक आहे का नाही? बर ठीक आहे. तर लास्ट टाइम वी हॅव सीन द RC coupled amplifier. Circuit diagram is most important. How we can draw the circuit diagram? We know that the circuit diagram of voltage divider bias, and we can connect the coupling capacitor, we can connect the bypass capacitor, and we can apply the input signal, and we can take the output signal across the load. This is the circuit diagram of RC coupled amplifier. Sir, नुसतं तुम्ही बोलून दाखवताय, डायग्राम आम्हाला काय दाखवत नाही. Actually, how we can draw the circuit diagram of RC coupled amplifier? This is the voltage water bias circuit of a single stage amplifier. This is the other stage voltage water bias circuit. Here we have to draw the coupling capacitor, cascaded capacitor. We can draw the bypass capacitor across RE. We can apply the input signal and we can take the output across the load resistance, across the REL, across the speaker. Here we have to connect the load at the output. Output is taken across load. Here in this circuit, load is not shown, but actually here we have to show the load. This is the circuit diagram of RC coupled amplifier. After that, we have to see the frequency response curve of an amplifier. In the frequency, what is the frequency response curve? Frequency response curve कशाला म्हणतो आपण? It is the graph of gain versus frequency. Voltage gain versus frequency. The voltage gain of the amplifier. Gain कशाला? Amplifier. Varies with frequency. Therefore, we can draw the graph of a voltage gain versus frequency. Here we have to, on the x-axis, there is a frequency. 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. On y-axis there is a gain, and that means here we have to say that the curve between voltage gain and signal frequency of amplifier, म्हणजे इनपुट सिग्नलची जी फ्रिक्वेन्सी आहे, सर बोलले की तीच फ्रिक्वेन्सी नसते बोलण्यामध्ये, बदलते, किंवा इनपुट सिग्नलची जी फ्रिक्वेन्सी आहे ती फ्रिक्वेन्सी व्हॅरी केली तर व्होल्टेज गेन कसा व्हॅरी होतोय, याला या कर्वलाच काय म्हणतो आपण, फ्रिक्वेन्सी रिस्पॉन्स कर्व. It is called as a frequency response curve. Initially understand frequency response curve. Therefore, what is the frequency response curve? The curve between voltage gain of an amplifier and frequency of the signal, input signal applied to the amplifier is known as a frequency response curve. We can take on the frequency of a input signal applied to the amplifier along the x-axis and voltage gain along the y-axis. As frequency increases, then what effect that can be observed on the voltage gain? Frequency वाढवली, from as frequency increases from the zero, what happen? What is the influence of frequency on this voltage gain? What is the effect of this frequency on the voltage gain? At a lower frequency, gain is smaller, gain is decreases. At higher frequency, gain is decreases. At mid frequency, gain remains constant. What is the why we observe at low frequency gain is smaller, at high frequency gain is smaller? We know that in amplifier circuit, there are inductors, there are resistors, there are capacitors. At high frequency, what happens? At low frequency, why the gain that can be decreased? At low frequency, reactance of the capacitor is, frequency is low, then reactance is large, resistance is large. At high frequency, we know that reactance of the capacitor is given by the equation 1 divided by omega c. Omega is nothing but twice pi f. That means 1 divided by twice pi fc. F is larger, reactance is smaller. F is smaller, reactance is larger, resistance is large. Resistance large, then voltage is nothing but the product of a resistance into the current. Current flow through that resistance is smaller, and therefore gain that can be decreased. Voltage gain, voltage increases, voltage decreases, gain that can be, output voltage decreases, gain that can be decreased. If input voltage is constant, output voltage that can be varies according to the frequency. Gain means, what is mean by gain? And why here we can observe the gain? On that, voltage gain of the amplifier that can be varies with frequency, and it is because that there are capacitance in the circuit and reactance of the capacitor that can be changes with the frequency of the applied input signal, and hence it affects on the output voltage. That means we can present or explain in your language. We know that the voltage gain of the amplifier that can be changes with the frequency of the input signal. And why this voltage gain that can be changes with the frequency of the input signal? For this purpose, we can say that in RC coupled amplifier or any amplifier, there are capacitance and reactance of the capacitor that can be changes with the frequency of input signal. And due to change in reactance, due to change in resistance, output voltage that can be changes, hence gain that can be changes. And here we have to draw the frequency response curve of a typical amplifier. And in the frequency response curve of a typical amplifier, here we have to say that at lower frequency gain that can be decreases, at higher frequency gain that can be decreases. But at middle frequency, gain remains constant. Therefore, voltage gain is independent on a frequency. इथून एवढं थोडं जरा सुरुवातीला सरांचं बोलणं चुकतंय आणि शेवटी जरा चुकतंय. मध्ये मात्र सरांचं बोलणं कॉन्स्टंट राहते, चांगलं राहते, म्हणजे फ्रिक्वेन्सीचा काय इफेक्ट होत नाही त्या गेनवर. म्हणजे व्होल्टेज गेन इट इज इंडिपेंडेंट ऑन ए फ्रिक्वेन्सी. व्होल्टेज गेन जो आहे तो कसा आहे, इट इज इंडिपेंडेंट ऑन ए फ्रिक्वेन्सी. दिस इज द कर्व फॉर ए टिपिकल एम्प्लीफायर. चांगल्या अँप्लिफायरचा एखादा चांगला टिपिकल स्टुडंट असेल का नाही, तो कसा बोलतो, कसा अभ्यास करतो, त्याला मार्क कशी मिळते, तसा हा दिस इज द फ्रिक्वेन्सी रिस्पॉन्स कर्व फॉर टिपिकल अँप्लिफायर. And from this curve, here we have to calculate the lower cutoff frequency, higher cutoff frequency. Here we does not denote the lower cutoff frequency and higher cutoff frequency. Actually, here there is a presentation of a frequency in between 20 Hz to 20 kilohertz. In between this frequency, that means this is the audio frequency. आपल्याला सर जे बोलतात ते कुठल्या फ्रिक्वेन्सी मध्ये बोलतात, 20 हर्ट्ज टू 20 किलो हर्ट्ज एवढ्या फ्रिक्वेन्सी मध्ये काय होतात सर बोलतात. आणि हे ऑडिओबल फ्रिक्वेन्सी रेंज आहे, दिस रेंज. नाउ हियर वी हॅव टू से दॅट cutoff frequency. What is mean by cutoff frequency? What is mean by 3 dB frequency? Therefore, here we have to say that the cutoff frequency. Here, the frequency at which voltage gain becomes 0.707 of its maximum value. He is the maximum value. This is the maximum value. And in this part, first we have seen the lower cutoff frequency, upper cutoff frequency, lower 3D frequency, upper 3D frequency. Difference between upper 3D frequency and lower 3D frequency is called as bandwidth. We know that in BC part first we have seen what is a bandwidth. Bandwidth is nothing but difference between upper cutoff frequency and lower cutoff frequency. Therefore, what is initially we can understand lower cutoff frequency or upper cutoff frequency, or what is meant by cutoff frequency? The frequency at which the frequency at this frequency here, the gain becomes this voltage gain. Voltage gain is nothing but output voltage divided by input voltage. Phi 0 divided by phi I becomes a 0.707 of its maximum value. इथला voltage maximum value किती आहे गेनची, इथे 1 समजली तर इथं 0.707 न मल्टिप्लाय केलं 1 ला तर किती मिळेल, 0.707. इथं आपल्याला काय मिळेल, कट होईल तो 0.707 पॉईंटचा इथं, आणि इथून जे आपल्याला आहे ते काय मिळेल, lower cutoff frequency. It is denoted by F1. This lower cutoff frequency is also called as the lower 3 dB frequency. Similarly, upper 3 dB, this line here we can try here, 0.707. Here we have to get the upper cutoff frequency. या ठिकाणी ह्या फ्रिक्वेन्सीला इथं हा पॉइंट कट होतो, या अप्पर cutoff frequency. How we can define cutoff frequency? The frequency at which this frequency, upper cutoff frequency or lower cutoff, the frequency at which gain that can be becomes or decreases 0.707 of its maximum voltage gain. 0.707 of its maximum voltage gain. त्यालाच काय म्हणतो आपण, cutoff frequency. It has a 2 cutoff frequency, known cutoff frequency. One is the F1 and there is the F2. F1 represent lower cutoff frequency, F2 represent upper cutoff frequency, and bandwidth is nothing but difference between upper cutoff frequency and lower cutoff frequency. In notes or in textbook, what is the frequency response curve? We can draw the frequency response curve. We draw this frequency response curve, and we can explain what is frequency response curve, higher gain that can be decreases. Also we can explain what is a cutoff frequency, explain there are 2 cutoff frequency, lower cutoff frequency, upper cutoff frequency. Lower cutoff frequency it is denoted by F1, upper cutoff frequency it is denoted by F2. It is also called as a 3 dB frequency. Lower 3 dB frequency is denoted by F1, upper 3 dB frequency is denoted by F2. Cutoff frequency is it is nothing but the frequency at which voltage gain, here we have to ratio, that means here we have to draw the voltage gain, has decreased to 0.707 of its maximum value, is called as a cutoff frequency. And from this cutoff frequency we can calculate the bandwidth, and therefore performance of the amplifier That will be why here we have to study the frequency response curve. What is the necessary to study the frequency response curve? Frequency response curve का study करायची गरज आहे? Because the performance of the amplifier that will be depends upon the frequency response curve. Frequency response curve gives us the performance of the amplifier. As frequency response curve is better, if the marks in the exam is better, the student's performance is better. Similarly, if the frequency response curve is better, then performance of that amplifier, we can draw the frequency response curve for amplifier. And if the frequency response curve of the amplifier is well, then performance of the amplifier it is well. If the frequency response curve it is gain is constant for all frequency, then we can say that the frequency response curve is best. If the bandwidth is infinity means f1 is 0, f2 is infinity. For this frequency, that means bandwidth is infinity. Then we can say that this amplifier has the maximum value of this bandwidth, and frequency response curve is better. From frequency response curve, we can calculate the bandwidth. And what is the use of the bandwidth? For all frequency, the gain is constant, voltage gain is constant, or current gain is constant. This is about the frequency response curve. After that, we have to see the next article. What is a feedback? On that amplifier circuit. Transistor, the name of the topic is a transistor amplifier circuit. If in the amplifier circuit, we have given a certain portion of a output energy to the input energy. You know that. This is the amplifier. What I apply amplifier? This is the amplifier. This is the amplifier. RC coupled amplifier. Two stage of RC coupled amplifier. This is the input signal. This is the output signal. This is the input. This is the output. Certain portion of a output signal is given to the input signal. Then it is called as a feedback. Certain portion of a output energy. सगळं देत नाही. Output सगळं तुम्ही असं करता का बरं? भरपूर पैसे कमवले, सगळे पैसे कमवले, सगळेच पैसे घरच्यांना देता. तसं नाही. काय असेल ती आउटपुट कशामुळे मिळते तुम्हाला घरच्यामुळे मिळते. तर या ठिकाणी सर्टन पोर्शन ऑफ आउटपुट एनर्जी, आउटपुट सिग्नल इज फेड बॅक टू द इनपुट सिग्नल. If how much input, how much output, according to this, there are two types of a feedback: positive feedback, negative feedback. These are the two types of a feedback. Here we have to see this. What is meant by feedback? The process of injecting a fraction of output energy of some device back to the input is called as a feedback. We can inject a fraction of output energy of some device, and it is given back to the feedback to the input is known as a feedback. Sir, हे तर definition अवघडच वाटते आहे. काय करायचं? आउटपुट मधले ठराविक पैसे काढायचं आणि दुसऱ्याला द्यायचं. पैसे त्यांना वाटते काय नाही. तसं इथं ठराविक पोर्शन आउटपुट मधला काढून इनपुटला द्यायचा. म्हणजे प्रोसेस ऑफ इंजेक्टिंग ए फ्रॅक्शन ऑफ आउटपुट एनर्जी ऑफ सम डिवाइस back to the input is known as a feedback. Therefore, again we can say that the other definition. What is the other definition? The certain portion of output voltage or output signal. Output T. Voltage means energy. Voltage means signal. Voltage म्हणा, त्याला signal म्हणा, त्याला energy म्हणा. The certain portion of output voltage is add or subtract in the input voltage. Input मध्ये add केलं किंवा subtract केलं, it is also called as a feedback. What is the second definition? This is the easy definition. we can consider the certain portion of output voltage that can be added or subtracted in the input voltage. Then it is called as a feedback. Why we have to study the feedback? काहीतरी यूज आहे ना त्याचा? काय यूज आहे? Feedback is used to reduce the noise in the amplifier. मग मी म्हणत होतो मटपतीला साऊंड तुमचा बंद करा, म्यूट करा. कशामुळे नॉइज होते ना तयार, डिस्टॉर्शन तयार होते ना. मग हा मी फीडबॅक दिला कोणाला? मटपतीला. मटपतीने काय केला? साऊंड बंद केला ना, त्यामुळे नॉइज रिड्यूस झाला. म्हणजे फीडबॅकचा किती फायदा आहे बघा. You also give the feedback for the teacher. If the marks in the exam is large, then feedback for the teacher is best. If you are failed, then feedback for the teacher is, how we can give the feedback for the teacher? You does not give the feedback for the teacher, correct? How teacher? The teacher that can be teach for all students. But some students got good mark, but some out of some students also got a very small mark. But the feedback for the teacher, how we can give, how teacher that can be teach, and how you can understand the teaching of the teacher, how we can understand the concept of the teacher, concept of the learning of teaching. According to this, you can give the feedback. Therefore, here we have to say that what is the necessary of study of a feedback. Initially, we can understand what is a feedback. Feedback is nothing but certain portion of the output voltage is given to the input voltage is called as a feedback, and it can be makes amplifier operation stable. Depending on whether the feedback energy that can be added in the input signal, depending on the whether the feedback energy that can be opposite or subtracted in the input signal. If output voltage दिलेला आहे ते इनपुट मध्ये ऍड झालं तर पॉझिटिव्ह फीडबॅक, इनपुट मधलं जर सबट्रॅक्ट झालं तर निगेटिव्ह फीडबॅक. And therefore, there are two types of feedback. One is the positive feedback and another is the negative feedback. That means here we have to study two types of feedback. One is the positive and another is the negative feedback. That means how we can study depending on the feedback energy that can be added or that can be subtracted. There are two types of feedback, positive feedback and negative feedback. We have to study a positive feedback. This is the positive feedback. This is the positive feedback. And the feedback energy, here we have to say that this is the input, this is the amplifier, this is the feedback device. काय तर टाकणार आपण कॅपॅसिटर किंवा डायरेक्ट हे सगळं असं जर इकडे दिलं तर सगळं आउटपुट इनपुटला दिलं जाईल आणि आउटपुट आणि इनपुट काय होईल? शॉर्ट होईल. त्यामुळं या ठिकाणी काय करतोय आपण? फीडबॅक नेटवर्क टाकतोय, फीडबॅक सर्किट टाकतोय, फीडबॅक डिव्हाइस टाकतोय आणि फीडबॅक डिव्हाइस थ्रू हे सगळं आउटपुट जे आहे ते ह्या इनपुटला देत नाही. ह्याच्यातलं हे एवढं असेल तर ह्याच्यातलं फक्त केवढा पार्ट देतो? एवढा पार्ट देतो, एवढा छोटा कमी करतोय. परत हे एवढं असेल तर ह्याच्यातलं काय देतो? कमी पार्ट. म्हणजे हे फीडबॅक एनर्जी. If this feedback energy that can be added in the input signal, then we have to get the positive feedback. That means we can apply the here input signal to the amplifier. What is the function of amplifier? That can be amplify the input signal. What is mean by amplification? Amplify them. What is mean by amplitude? Maximum displacement from mean position. This is the mean position. This is maximum displacement from mean position is called as the amplitude. This amplitude that can be increases. This amplitude that can be increases by using this amplifier. This here CA amplifier produces a 180-degree phase shift. Last time we have seen that means during positive half cycle of the input signal, we have to get the negative half cycle at the output. During negative half cycle of the input signal, we have to get the positive half cycle at the output. इनपुटला निगेटिव्ह असले की आउटपुटला पॉझिटिव्ह मिळते. इनपुटला पॉझिटिव्ह असेल तर आउटपुटला निगेटिव्ह मिळते. Therefore, what is the phase difference between output and input of this amplifier? CA amplifier introduces 180-degree phase shift because in between output and input there are 180-degree phase shift. This feedback network also introduces a 180-degree phase shift. Here initially there is a negative cycle. Here we have to get this negative cycle is given to the input of a feedback network. Here we have to get the positive cycle. Also during here there is a positive cycle, then here we have to get the negative cycle. That means this feedback network also produces a 180-degree phase shift. Amplifier circuit also produces a 180-degree phase shift. Total phase shift becomes this 180 degree, this 180 degree. Total phase shift becomes a 360 degree. And here we have to say that such a positive feedback that can be used in oscillator circuit. Initially, we can understand what is a positive feedback. When feedback energy, this is the feedback energy. This is the feedback signal, which are in phase. Here, input and feedback energy, which are in phase. When there is a positive half cycle, also in case of a feedback energy, there is a positive half cycle. When there is a negative half cycle in the input signal, at the same time there is a negative half cycle in feedback energy. When the phase of this input energy and feedback energy, it is the same. When the feedback energy is in phase, this feedback energy, is in phase with input energy, then what happens? This positive cycle gets added into this positive half cycle, then its amplitude that can be increased. This negative half cycle that can be added into this negative half cycle, then also negative amplitude that can be increased. That means the amplitude that can be increased, input that can be increased. This input is given to this amplitude that can be increased, input that can, when this input, then when this feedback energy that can be added into the input energy, then what happens? This input that can be increased. As this input increases, what happens? Output also increases. Input जर वाढलं तर आउटपुट वाढणारच ना, कारण गेन नेहमी असतो कसा असतो? पॉझिटिव्ह असतो. व्होल्टेज गेन काय पॉझिटिव्ह ठेवतो ना, करंट गेन सुद्धा कुठला पॉझिटिव्ह असतो. म्हणजे हे आउटपुट सुद्धा काय होईल? वाढेल. Therefore, as input increases, output energy, output voltage that can be increases, and such a type of a feedback is called as a positive feedback. Output जर वाढलं तर पॉझिटिव्ह फीडबॅक म्हणायचं. आउटपुट जर कमी झालं तर काय म्हणणार? निगेटिव्ह फीडबॅक. म्हणजे how we can explain the positive feedback? When the feedback energy is in phase with input signal. म्हणजे this feedback energy is in phase with input signal. Then what happens? This feedback energy gets added into the input voltage. And therefore what happens? This input voltage that can be increases, and therefore output voltage increases, and such a type of a feedback is called as a positive feedback. Now here output increases, we have to get the large output. Therefore we can say that this positive feedback that can be used in amplifier circuit, but it is actually wrong. This positive feedback does not used in amplifier circuit. Why this positive feedback that which is not used in the amplifier circuit? because it produces a distortion, it produces a noise in the output. We know that if there are number of students that can be participated in lecture, if the number of students as student is large, therefore lecture is very well, but actually lecture is very better, but actually what happens? If number of students that can be participated presented in the for the lecture, then what happens? There is a distortion, there is a noise of that student. Some students on the bench that can be taunt for with each other. The some students that can be tell or talk with each other, and therefore this distortion that can be actually large student. Actually, there is a positive feedback, but this positive feedback it is not used in the amplifier circuit. Here we have to say that in positive feedback, both amplifier circuit and feedback circuit. That circuit means network. एकच शब्द आहे, नेटवर्क म्हटलं काय सर्किट म्हटलं काय. Amplifier and feedback network introduces a phase shift of 180 degree. Amplifier circuit produces a 180 degree phase shift. That means when we given the positive half cycle input, we have to get the negative half cycle at the output. That means there is a 180 degree phase shift between output and input. In case of a feedback device, feedback circuit network, it produces also 180 degree. Therefore, total phase shift becomes, what is the value of a total phase shift is 180 plus 180, 360 around that loop, and which causes the feedback. The positive feedback increases gain of the amplifier, but positive feedback increases distortion